Hi, everyone. So thank you for this kind invitation. I'm Simona from Ljubljana Pride Association, and hopefully you are able to see my screen now. Yeah, excellent. So yes, in Ljubljana Pride Association, and what I will present to you, it's a little bit different from what we've just heard from Eka and Nino, in a way that it's a little bit maybe even more utilitarian. It's like one small bit and piece of the story. So I'm very grateful for yeah, this kind of introduction, what we saw from the field being done in Georgia, because some of the things I can relate to, obviously, but then also yeah, the presentation that I prepared is a little bit more going into some specifics and details. Okay, so first, a few words about Ljubljana Pride Association for you that you might not know what we do or the context in Slovenia, just to understand a little bit our framework, because who we are as an organization impacts fundamentally how we do communications. So, what is our communication strategy? And then out of that, also, how do we how have we developed and engage in terms of member engagement? Also, what is this concept? What is all of this? So, Ljubljana Pride Association, one of the specificities is that we are a membership-based youth-led association. So, an association in Slovenia, it's a democratically organized organization with elected boards and presidents and all of these kind of democratic structures. And another specificity is that we are a youth-led association, which also there is a national legislation framework for that, which, for example, prescribes that we have to maintain a membership structure of 90% of all the members have to be below 29 years of age. And also all the governing structures, the elected ones have to be 70% below 29 years of age. So as one of the interesting consequences, I always share this, I am an elected president, which doesn't have voting rights in our own organization because I'm too old to have the right to vote, according to this structure. The other interesting situation is that, well, as our name already says, we are the main pride organizer in Slovenia. And what does this mean? Slovenia is not necessarily a country that protests and this kind of, demonstrations, masses of people on the street. This is not the cultural norm. Being a protest or activist organization in that sense means you're working on a margin. Just to give you some insights, is Ljubljana Pride manages now, after more than 20 years of having every year a Pride, mobilize about 5,000 people to join the march. And to give you a comparison, 8th of March protests, which are International Women's Day protests, they managed to mobilize about 500 in Ljubljana, in the capital. And some of the biggest protests our country has seen in the last 20 years were organized either by the trade unions or the student organizations movement, or, for example, kind of civil society, huge coalitions during COVID times. And we never seen really in the past 20 years protests with more than like pretty much 30,000 people. So in that context, the pride is significant for our context, right? So the fact that we already have a certain mobilization capacity for the march. The other thing is that Ljubljana Pride Association, we've managed in the last years to build, again, within this context, a strong social media presence and kind of like a base followers, right? About 7,000 people on Facebook, over 5,000 people on Instagram, and then TikTok. It really depends on what. But these were, until now, our main social media channels. And also then one of our core ambitions, core aims of the organization is to really strategically work throughout all different programs to mobilize particularly LGBTIQ plus young people for political participation, for them to be active in their local community framework, and and then all the way in all the different democratic processes. So we mobilize people for elections, but we also mobilize them to go and be elected in certain, for us and so on, so that they're also sitting as representatives in some spaces where things are being decided about their lives. It also means that we are not a very mainstream organization. So that also means that our ambition in that regard is to really mobilize those that will be very active and to kind of like build up young people, LGBTIQ plus young people that will afterwards be able to and wanting to take on these kind of roles. And that for us is a bigger priority than to have bigger numbers. And hence a lot of the strategies then also impact this. So now I could talk about many different aspects how we do this. In 2022, we adopted a first ever organizational communications strategy. And then after that, when we had a framework around how do we do strategically our communications, we also started to more and more understand that we need something more, because a lot of our communication strategy was focused into either how do we use social media and how do we get our messages there across, or how do we like inform people through different channels like newsletters and things like this, and of course how do we work with the media. But it didn't give us enough tools. How do we then actually engage people, right? And if such a huge priority for us is not necessarily to do sensitivity type of campaigns, but rather to really mobilize people, then we had to do something more. So one of the answers what to do was this concept of member engagement. This concept comes, or the way we use it, it comes from international kind of platforms that do multi-issue online campaigning, right? So if you've ever heard of organizations like change.org, We Move Europe, these kind of like big international frameworks, All Out, for example, some of you may have worked with All Out. And basically, so they're usually online based, mobilizing kind of machineries that allow mass petitions to be organized, signed, and then I don't know, you have a petition within a campaign and you want to mobilize 1 million Europeans or let's say EU citizens for something, and then with that you try to pressure the European Commission, right? European Citizenship Initiative is one of the tools of the European Commission, for example, that also works on a similar way. So it comes from that world, right? So it comes from the world of online engagement and mobilization. And the background of the online part of the member engagement is that for decades, civil society organizations have been skilled and have been practicing how to do offline campaigning, right? A lot of organizations we will know, like Greenpeace, like Amnesty International, a lot of LGBTIQ plus organizations, throughout decades, they have become very good in experts in some topics, and then also doing some offline campaigning. However, in the last decades, there was a certain lack of mobilization potential. So there more and more huge masses needed to be mobilized in a way in order to make a difference. Because who's on the other side? Usually you're fighting in these fights either strong corporate lobbies or some kind of other, adversary. So you have to mobilize a lot of people. So this was in the concept. So these online approaches developed. So then we said, okay, let's learn from that, right? What can we as Ljubljana Pride Association, what can we as an organization that is small, right? That it works in that kind of small context, right? So imagine if our biggest mobilization capacity is 5,000 people during a Pride March, how do we then use a methodology that can mobilize 1 million signatures on a petition, right? And this is basically what our member engagement strategy tries to do, is to take a concept but then apply it basically to our reality. So there are 3 questions that we needed to ask for ourselves and answer for ourselves. And the first question that we needed to answer was like, okay, so who is a member in our context? Because of course now we're not talking about members of our association, right? Like who signed a membership application and who votes in our processes. So the concept of a member with member engagement is basically any person that kind of like becomes part of your wider database of so-called, let's say, willing and active supporters. So it is a person that you're connected with online and offline, or online only, it depends, and is willing to be in some kind of connection to you. So some kind of allies, supporters, at different levels, but people who are consciously and willingly also engaging with you on some level. And then, okay, member. Then how do we understand the engagement? Now, this comes the other tricky part, right? And why I'm also speaking about this here today. Because a lot of the concept that we took was really based on the online engagement, on the, kind of like people mobilizing to sign digitally a petition or to create a campaign and then share it on social media. So a lot of it, like 99% of everything was done through this. But we understand engagement differently, because for us, our final goal is to have a person actively politically getting involved and showing up for a protest, right? Or to an action, like we saw all these different tactics that Eka and Nino have been sharing before, all these actions, all these alternative ways how to try, and try out. So you need people to show up for that, right? So for us, this is engagement. So how do we get from having somebody signing up into a mailing list, for example, and that person who is, let's say, almost like a passive receiver of a weekly, monthly email, to that person becoming as engaged as getting themselves physically to a public space to showcase their support for something, protest for something, or engaged in something, right? So this was our task. So this is how we understand the engagement, this path, this process. And then of course the last third thing we needed to answer to ourselves is, so which tools and tactics are we using, right? And all of our online part of the member engagement was very much based on what we do in terms of our communication strategy. What do we use, social media, newsletter, these kind of things. But then also we needed to obviously now develop offline tactics. We also needed to understand what for us then is this offline part of the engagement, and how do we build that, and what does that mean? So out of that, we developed our member engagement strategy. And of course, I would like to say, because we started to develop the strategy in 2023, we've kind of have the first draft or like the first version of us in 2024. That also means that we are kind of still in the process of understanding what works and what doesn't work, right? So it's also something that will be refined and revised and looked at throughout the different future years as well, right? So it's not a final product. But basically, our member engagement strategy then it has 4 chapters, basically 4 areas. One is, okay, identifying what is the scope. So who are the target groups we are trying to engage? What are the communication channels we use? And then we have identified basically 3 different areas of this engagement, the member engagement: the online member engagement, the physical engagement, and financial engagement. So I will not speak today about the online and the financial part so much, but I will focus on the physical part of the engagement. So what is then this that we did? And let me tell you something, it's not big science, right? It's just that we tried to frame a lot of the things that we wanted to do or were already doing in the past within a new umbrella and with a little bit of a different goal. So what we realize is that in order for this whole concept of member engagement to work, the fundamental premise is that you need a certain level of, like, a big base of these members, of the contacts, right? And usually that means you need a huge mailing list. Now, Let's imagine if our ambition was to collect 100,000 signatures on a petition, our base of members would need to be probably somewhere around 200,000 to 500,000 people who would have been signed up as our members in this concept. Because that logic functions in a way that if you have a big pool of people who are, following you, who are willing to support you, not necessarily all of them will agree on every single topic, right? So maybe you have 500,000 people on your list, but maybe only 100,000 will sign a singular petition. So again, in our context, if we, what we wanted to achieve, so our goals were very simple. Things like, okay, we would like to mobilize more people to come to our events. And when I say more, if on an average event that we would organize 5 to 12 people would show up, we wanted to have 30. And for example, if now if we had a mobilizing capacity that we would organize, let's say Ljubljana Pride would organize that we would join a climate protest, for example, I don't know, Fridays for Future activity. So let's say that we could mobilize maybe again 5 to 15 people to come, saying, like not sending people, 2, 3 colleagues from the office who work and then this becomes their work task. No, but people outside of that, where we would make a social media post or call, look, let's do a solidarity action. We need to move into something like this. And then who would respond, because when are these protests? In Slovenia, very often these type of protests, like 5 o'clock in the afternoon, or something like this, or sometimes in the middle of the day because they have to have a press conference. So it's 11 in the morning. So no, you would have like 5 to 15 people show up in this context. So we said, okay, we want to have a mobilization effect that if we put out a call like this, 30 to 50 people would show up, right? So I'm also sharing this because our goals were also not to have 100,000 signatures. Our goals were according to our own reality and where we wanted to achieve this change, right? So they were more tangible for us, or let's say more realistic. So we wanted to do, like we wanted to have people coming to the events, participate in protests, come to general assemblies, engage more with volunteering, different actions, like let's say something would happen in the media and we would need to do like a street action or something like this within 24 hours, maybe some rapid response things and so on. But also like with big mobilizations, like when we have national elections, European Parliament elections, we really also wanted to mobilize and have a base to mobilize LGBTIQ plus young people to go and vote. So of course, how many people we wanted to mobilize, it really depended on this. So our physical engagement then is divided within the strategy in 3 areas: attending the actual Pride, Ljubljana Pride, but also other Pride events in Slovenia, because we have at least in the Maribor, second biggest city, we have Pride every 2 years, and we have occasionally also other Prides in other cities in Slovenia. Then participating in activities together with Ljubljana Pride and engaging in campaigns, right? So we wanted to have people responding to our calls when we would, like I said before, either join protests of other movements and organizations, but also when we would organize something because we felt it's very important. For example, last Friday, we had a protest in front of the Hungarian embassy as one of the actions, to raise awareness and create political pressure towards, what's happening in Hungary with the, let's say, so-called prohibition of the Pride Parade, right? So of course, if we organize a protest like this in front of the Hungarian embassy, we want people to show up, right? Typical example. And then this mobilization for quick responses, because for example, something like last Friday's protest, it was more than a week announced in advance. So you have some time to promote and mobilize. But when you need to react really quickly within a couple of hours or latest the day after something happens, then also there's a little bit different kind of mobilization capacity you need. So we also put some effort into this, what is the strategy and tactics around the mobilization for quick response. Then basically, what were then some of the tactics we used or we are using, because we develop new ones and we test and we see what works and what doesn't work still all the time. So one of the things that we had access to is kind of like to organize engagement activities at so-called mass events and fairs. Let's say in Slovenia, every year we have consortium of volunteering organizations organize like a fair of all the volunteering organizations. So in the city center of Ljubljana, you have 150 stalls with different organizations coming from over Slovenia presenting what they do, right? So also that means it attracts a certain type of people coming, and then you can do some activities there. So we would explore different type of, or for example, there's some festivals with music program, and then during the day you also have some kind of different activities, right? So this kind of like develop specific engagement activities for this type of mass events or fairs, where masses of young people or people would be, kind of like gathering there, and then you try to make this contact. Then what we also did as one of the tactics is we started to build up a group of people, so-called paradniki, or so-called pride folk, which were actually the people implementing these things in the field. Because we realized that, you can't just send a random person to a random event and then they are able to do what they're supposed to do, to run these engagement activities, because there are many different things. One is that it's the kind of activities where people need to speak to people need to have the skills to make other people do something, and thirdly, there are LGBTIQ plus people, and the things they want other people to do are LGBTIQ plus related, so they always run into security risks, harassment, and so on. So you also need to build methods and protection and to be safe while doing it, right? And then, for example, another thing which we did is we developed a lot of different ways how to try to engage people with people. So we developed quizzes, game-like activities, so that when you do interact with people, that you have something to, not just a content or a topic, but also how you bridge this topic to the people so that they get involved. And then also we came up with a lot of ideas for different prizes. So like if people do something, then they get something in return, right? Or like if they fill out some questions, then they get a small gift in the end or something like this. So we developed a lot of this kind of like incentive type of approaches as well. I'm talking now about tactics we used offline, but many of the same tactics we also used in some online engagement approaches as well. So we would also do quizzes and game and prize things also, for example, in online engagement. But I'm focusing on offline today. And then also what we did is that whenever we wanted to people to get somehow involved and do something, we needed to have some kind of a context or topic, right? So we realized that this is important, and not always we use the same topic, right, to get people involved. So maybe now you see a little bit like the tactics, but what was the main goal, right, of all of these things? So you remember I said before, for us, the basic principle was, if we are able to build a bigger base of supporters, then we are able to do the other kind of things, right? If we have a big enough base of people that we can communicate with regularly, then out of the mass of people we communicate with regularly, statistically, it's more likely that more people will be more likely to get engaged or involved on a higher level. Higher level meaning, like, for example, you have somebody who is willing to not only receive, let's say, a newsletter once a week from you, but also will click in the newsletter and fill out a survey for you. Or not only receive a newsletter, but also read in the newsletter, oh, next week there is an engagement activity, and they will come to the engagement activity and participate. Or share something on their social media. Or one of the highest engagement activities also is literally donate money for some of your causes. So the levels of engagement, how of a member, are measured according to how they're willing to get engaged. And the first level is always that they're willing to receive information from you, meaning that they say, yes, I want to be in your mailing list. And yes, I'm willing to have some kind of communication from the side of you as an organization, or, whoever you are as an organizer. So the goal behind all of these things was always to grow our list. So we started this with our list being several hundred people. By now we have about 3,400, right? So less than 1,000. So we are literally talking about few hundred to 3,400 within a scope of 2 years. Not all of these 3,400 contacts are through offline engagement tactics. But the logic was that those people who come into this list and into this process through offline engagement tactics, they're going to be the ones that are going to stay with us and also stay later more engaged, or they will not drop out. So that was the logic, right? So what did we learn? Final aspect. So what we learned in this process until now is that the approach to have this type of volunteers or young people also to get engaged as these, Pride folks, to do all these tactics and all these activities in the field can be super, super efficient. However, they need to be trained. If you don't train them, they're not able to, and they might come up once. They might come once to try. They're going to have a bad experience because they're going to feel like they're not able to do something meaningful, and they're not going to come again to continue being engaged like that. So you need to have a system of training. This was one of the things that it was very, very clear. The other thing which we learned is that whenever we had incentives for people to, let's say our team that tried to do this in the field, the moment they had little gifts to give or little tokens or something, people responded much better. Because of course, this type of activity always requires of a person to take time, so that you can tell them what you want from them, and then they have to take the time to actually do something for you, right? Fill out a quiz, fill out a questionnaire, and at the end, leave you their contacts, right? So it takes time. It takes more than just few minutes, maybe. So in order for people to be willing to do that, tokens and gifts and so on, like when we had that, it worked really better. And when we didn't have that, people really struggled. The other thing which we learned is that context and topics really matter. So we chose sometimes certain contexts to try to engage with people, and we were very unsuccessful because we realized that if we go to, let's say, if we would have tried to do these activities during a protest, it didn't work because there was no space and time to do it. And people were not willing to stop and do something with you when they were there for the protest and there was something movement or this or that. However, it worked very well if there were things like, pride villages or fairs or something where there was a mass people stationary for a longer period of time, where people who were there already kind of expected to be there for a longer period of time. And then it worked better. But also in terms of topics, our experience was if we just come to the people, hi, we're Ljubljana Pride Association, would you like to know about what we work, would you like to get engaged with us, here is a way, la la la, people will be like, I'm busy, whatever. But if we had some kind of specific topics or something to catch them, then at the end we were more successful for people to say, yeah, it's okay, you can send me emails, yeah, it's okay, I would like to find out something more, right? Then also what we realized is that on one hand side, the more massive response or approach, kind of if we had this kind of shortcuts, if we had ways where we would be able to get a bigger amount of people quickly on board, that also meant that once they became contacts on our list, within the next weeks, they also dropped out. Right? So let's say we would have had a shortcut. Oh, just fill this out and you're going to get a gift, without really engaging and interacting. What is it? Why is it? And taking the time. Then people would just sign up because they wanted the gift. But then afterwards, we could see same people dropping out very quickly because, okay, I sign up for a mailing list and then tomorrow I, unsubscribe. So the more quality we put into it, the more quality we got out of it. So that was another lesson. So if you invest, you get results. This was really like, whenever we invested our time, our resources, our energy, our creativity, our investment into speaking with the people, then there were results. When we didn't have the time to do it properly, then also the results were, it didn't really work well. And it was more effort than, output. And then also super important thing is that the other thing is that if you don't have somebody to coordinate this will not just happen. So if you don't have a person that really is like, or a team of people that are really developing this concept and are understanding it and are kind of like managing it, then it doesn't just happen, right? It seems so simple and it seems so business as usual, but in practice it shows to us it's not. And the moment we didn't have a person specifically there or specifically focused on this, with people specifically kind of like knowing that this is their role and task and how to do it, this doesn't happen. And that was maybe the last thing from my side. So I don't know if this resonates or if it's helpful, but at least this is what we're doing, and partially it's been successful, and many things have not been successful.